Hello, hello, everyone. Hello out there on the social media worlds. Hello, Facebook. Hello, Instagram. Hello, YouTube. We are so excited. This is our very first live stream. So, welcome, welcome. My name is Tiffany Thornhill. I'm the chair of the Justice Pillar here for the Commission on African American Affairs in the state of Arizona. I'm also the program manager in the Pastor Center for Politics and Public Service at Arizona State University. So, first, I want to say thank you to the Pastor Center for helping us start this wonderful monthly series that we have going right now. Originally, we did webinars that eventually were posted on YouTube, but now we're here already. So we are so grateful for the Pastor Center helping us start this movement and being that catalyst to push us to where we are today. So going forward, these will be solely presented to you by the Commission on African American Affairs here in this live stream format. So again, thank you to the Pastor Center. And we will now move forward with our Pillar Talk series. I'm so excited for it, but I do want to get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way. So as this is our first one, Please forgive us. Give us some grace if we have some technical difficulties, but we will do our best to make this a very impactful experience for you. Today, we're going to be talking about surveillance and civil rights and analyzing and identifying the disparities in that technology. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the executive director, the new executive director of the Commission on African American Affairs, to introduce our presenter. Jerry?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I would like to ask you to, no matter what platform you're dialing in on, please like, comment, share, let the world know that you're with us. We want to get as many people to this program as possible, and we can use a little bit of help. If you would just do a little bit of clicks, invite your friends, and kind of let them all know that this is where we're spending our Thursday evening. As Tiffany mentioned, my name is Jerry McPherson, and I serve as Executive Director for the Commission of African American Affairs, and wanted to give a huge kudos and thank you to Tiffany Thornton, who serves as our pillar chair, along with committee members, as well as serving as Commissioner Diane Post and Robbie Sherwood. We have an awesome program ahead of you. This committee has been working really hard over the past month to bring programming specific to justice to your screens each and every month, and we look forward to the continued work that you all are doing. Today, we have a special program, and without any further ado, I would like to take a moment to introduce our guest speaker, Carlton Mayers. Prior to founding Mayers Strategic Solutions, LLC, Carlton directed the NAACP National Office's Criminal Justice Program and advanced criminal justice reform in Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities throughout the U.S. Carlton also co-authored the NAACP's Born Suspect and Racial Profiling Report, which educates the public on ending racial profiling by law enforcement on the state and local levels. As policy counsel for the Policing Reform Campaign at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, Carlton conducted legal research and writing on racial bias and discrimination by law enforcement arising under federal and state criminal and law procedure. Further in this role, he strategized on creating policy and advocating for policing reform to federal, state, and local governments. Likewise, Carlton advanced policing reforms in several localities throughout the U.S., such as working on the consent decrees in Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore, Maryland, policing reforms in North Charleston, South Carolina, related to the Walter Scott case, and the New York Police Department's use of stop and frisk tactics in New York City. In all of these localities, Carlton worked with community members and other public safety stakeholders on establishing mechanisms and processes that meaningfully include community members in identifying, strategizing, and implementing solutions for public safety and policing reform. Additionally, on behalf of LDF, Carlton collaborated with officials from President Obama's administration on various policing reform initiatives implemented by the White House and the U.S. Department of Justice, including the 21st Century Policing Task Force final report. Without further ado, I would like to bring and introduce Carlton Mayers to the program. Welcome, Carlton.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Jerry. And thank you very much for having me. I hope everybody's having a good evening. And I'm looking forward to having this discussion with you. I'm going to talk about a topic that is a hot topic right now, which is the use of surveillance tech, facial recognition technology, artificial intelligence to solve public safety challenges, and what needs to be done to make sure that the use of these technologies and services still adheres to the democratic process. So I'm going to talk about that with you today. So let me go into my presentation. So good evening, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you today about community empowerment-centered approach for automated enforcement in public safety. Through my consulting company, Mayers Strategic Solutions, LLC, I work with communities across the country on solving public safety challenges by establishing their own public safety solutions centered on community empowerment through an approach that I developed called the Community Empowerment Centered Approach, and its vehicle called the CAP method, which stands for C for Community Empowerment, A for Accountability, and T for Transparency. Next slide. So let's first talk about what exactly is automated enforcement and what is an automated enforcement ecosystem, okay? So automated enforcement mechanisms like surveillance technologies and services, facial recognition, and other biometric recognition technologies like eye retina recognition, fingertip recognition, clothes recognition. There are all kinds of ways that technology can recognize us. In addition to predictive policing technologies and services, and the application of artificial intelligence, AI, to all of these technologies and services, including body-worn cameras, which is now a new thing. Body-worn cameras now have AI incorporated into them. That is a hot topic right now. A lot of law enforcement are looking at purchasing them. So all of these different kinds of automated enforcement are becoming the favorite solutions to prevent negative police encounters, given the public's attention on and criticism of law enforcement misconduct, including biased and race-based policing, the shortage in law enforcement staffing nationwide, the public's perception of increased crime across the country, the windfall of money and resources from the federal, state, and local governments and private sources like police foundations to state and local law enforcement, and calls to prohibit or even restrict law enforcement traffic stops and to replace armed law enforcement with unarmed civilians for traffic stops. As a result of this situation and the ongoing challenge faced by law enforcement agencies nationwide to hire and retain officers, law enforcement is turning to technology as a colorblind alternative to help solve crime. A lot of law enforcement believe that technology could identify and enforce laws without any association to race, gender, or ethnicity. They also believe that if programmed correctly in regards to behaviors, robotic forms of policing, whether they be unmanned aerial drones, fixed cameras, or robots, should be implemented and accepted. The collateral benefits that are being advertised are improved officer safety, reduced incidents of use of force. Now, what I want you to look at here on this slide, what you see is, you see that there are, what I put here are several different kinds of surveillance technologies that are currently being used by law enforcement and by other city government agencies, like Department of Transportation, Parks and Rec, Sanitation. So when you look in the far left-hand corner, what you see there, that is a license plate reader. Below that, that's a red light camera. Then if you look over to the right-hand side, that is a speed light camera. Above that is an unmanned aerial drone. And then right next to that speed light camera, that's a regular fixed surveillance camera. You can find that at any private business, any city government building, etc. And then on the far right of this picture, what you see on the top and the bottom, those are license plate readers that are attached to a law enforcement vehicle, so that anytime a car passes by that car passes by any vehicle, the plates of that vehicle are automatically being read by the license plate reader, so the officer in the vehicle can see the information related to that plate. So the reason why I wanted to put this kaleidoscope of different kinds of automated enforcement technologies and services here for you to visualize is so that you can get an idea of what exactly law enforcement and other municipal and state government agencies are using to form what I call an ecosystem, right? It's not just one piece of surveillance technology, it's multiple pieces. So the best way to think about it is this. You have here, there's about 6 different pieces of technology. Each one of them is collecting data, okay? When they collect data, that is a pathway of data that they are creating. So if you're law enforcement or any kind of government agency, and you want to know, okay, what happened at so-and-so on location, at so-and-so on time, on so-and-so on date, you would have to look at your surveillance technology to look up the date, time, and location. What did that technology collect for data? Now, that could show up on a computer screen as a web page. So if you have 6 different pieces of technology, that's 6 different web pages. Each web page is a pathway, a stream of data, okay? So now there's actually technology out there called Fusus, F-U-S-U-S, that when you it's a box, you put it near the technologies, it essentially consolidates all of these different pathways, all of these 6 different web pages into one, okay? One web page, one pathway of data, meaning that now law enforcement, city government officials, state government officials, they can look at it on their computer screen, and all of these different technologies, they can get all of that data on one web page so that they can see what happened here, so-and-so on time, so-and-so in place. And that to me is wonderful when we're talking about trying to solve crimes, but it's problematic when you, the taxpayer, don't know what data are they collecting, who's collecting the data, what are they going to do with the data, who are they sharing it with, are they selling the data, who's buying the data. These are all questions that should be asked in a democracy, where if you're paying for something, you have a say over how they are going to serve you, right? You go to McDonald's, you go to Goldman Sachs, you go to a car dealership. If somebody that works there is giving you a nasty attitude, you have every right to say, I want to talk to your supervisor, file a complaint. When it comes to law enforcement and the use of these technologies, and even other city government entities and state government entities, because there are no official laws on the books to govern this stuff, they're just using it, and there's no clear way to file a complaint, no clear way to get accountability, to get transparency on how your tax dollars are being used. And so this is where the automated enforcement ecosystem is at play and can also be problematic. But if you have the proper democratic processes in place, can also help you to solve crimes and other public safety challenges. So that's what we're going to talk about today. How can something like this become something more beneficial rather than detrimental for a community by utilizing democratic processes? Next slide. So before we do that, let's first talk about the legal considerations. I kind of touched on it a bit, but let's get in a bit deeper, okay? So as you can see here, the Fourth Amendment, right? The Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution provides that, quote unquote, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause. Now, a search under the Fourth Amendment occurs when a governmental employee or agent of the government violates an individual's reasonable expectation of privacy. A seizure of a person within the meaning of a Fourth Amendment occurs when the police officer's conduct would communicate to a reasonable person, or even, well, let's say law enforcement in this case, taking into account the circumstances surrounding the encounter, that the person is not free to ignore the police presence and leave at his or her will. Now, something I want you to understand when we're talking about the Fourth Amendment, we're talking about search and seizure, we're talking about reasonable suspicion, we're talking about probable cause, all right? I want you to understand exactly what is reasonable suspicion and what is probable cause, and then how does that tie into things that we know about, like stop and frisk, right? So we're going to talk about that right now. So first, probable cause is present when a police officer has reasonable belief, also known as reasonable suspicion, in the guilt of a suspect based on the facts and information prior to the arrest. Reasonable suspicion is a legal standard that allows law enforcement to briefly detain and question someone if they have good reason to suspect criminal activity. The requirements to establish reasonable suspicion are specific facts. The officer must have specific facts or observations that indicate possible criminal activity. They also rational inferences. The officer's actions must be based on objective facts and rational inferences, not just hunches or intuition. And then lastly, totality of circumstances, as you can see on the slide. The officer must consider the totality of circumstances, including the person's demeanor, clothing, and any other relevant factors. So the best way that I can describe probable cause, number one, is that probable cause is necessary to justify warrantless searches like a traffic stop or related to stop and frisk. Now, why am I talking about warrantless searches? Well, when we're talking about the use of cameras, we're talking about the use of audio sensors like gunshot detection technology. When these technologies are triggered, when they're activated, they are collecting data. If it's visual data, if it's audio data, it's data. Sometimes that data, if it's audio, can be conversations you're having, not knowing that that technology is activated and collecting that data of your conversation. Sometimes it's visual, and you don't know if it's collecting data on your face, on your clothes, on your whereabouts, etc. The whole point is that there's no warrant involved in this intrusion of your right to privacy, okay? In this intrusion of your personal space, okay? That's what the Fourth Amendment provides for. So if there's not a warrant that is required for them to collect this data from you and use it however they're going to use it, then we have to rely on whatever the legal doctrine is as it relates to warrantless searches. So just want to make sure you understand This is why I'm focused on warrantless searches as it relates to the Fourth Amendment. So with that said, the best way for you to understand probable cause, and this is how I describe it during my Know Your Rights trainings, is we all have five senses, right? Okay, you have your ears for hearing, your eyes for sight, right? You have your nose for smell, your tongue for taste, and you have your skin, right, to feel, for touch. Now, when we talk about reasonable suspicion, right, if an officer stops you, let's say that you're driving, you're swerving on the road, they now have reasonable suspicion to believe that you could be a threat to public safety, because swerving on the road can eventually lead to somebody getting hurt. That now gives them enough reasonable suspicion to stop your car and question you, not necessarily arrest you, but just to stop you and question you. Now, how does this relate to a pedestrian who's walking down the street? Let's say that law enforcement officers get an anonymous tip that criminal activity is occurring in a specific location at a specific time, right? They go to that location, you're there, and you're acting kind of odd. Looks like you might be engaging in some kind of activity that's similar to the anonymous tip that they received, right? You fit the description, etc. Now, they have a right to stop you and question you, not necessarily arrest you, but they can stop you and question you, okay? So that's reasonable suspicion. And that's where we talk about stop and frisk. That's the stop part, right? Traffic stops. Now, when we talk about frisk, we talk about searches. We're talking about probable cause. Like I said earlier, you had five senses. The way that probable cause works is that if law enforcement is able to use their five senses, and using their five senses, be able to identify and determine that a criminal activity is either occurring or is about to occur, right? Then that now gives them probable cause to now search you. So a good example, let's say that traffic stop, we're going to go back to that. So, they stop you, you swerving. Now the officer comes over to the driver's side window. You drop the window, bye-bye. Now they say to you, license registration. As you're getting that and you're giving it to them, the officer starts sniffing around, right? Why are they doing that? Well, they're not doing it because they have allergies. They're doing it because they're using their sense of smell to determine, is there maybe burnt marijuana in the vehicle? Because maybe under that state law, marijuana is not legal. And so they might think, okay, you right now potentially have committed a criminal act. Now you're giving me probable cause to ask you to step out of the vehicle. I don't need a warrant. And now I can search the vehicle. I can search you to see if there's any other criminal activity that might be happening, like maybe possession of an illegal firearm. Okay. So that's how probable cause ties into traffic stops. Let's talk about it with stop and frisk. Remember I said earlier, they got the anonymous tip, right? So now you fit the description, they're stopping you, questioning you. Let's say as they're questioning you, they use their eyes, once again, one of the five senses, and they see a bulge in your pocket. Now, they can claim, oh, it's a bulge. It looks like it could be a firearm, a gun. So I'm going to frisk you. While they're frisking you, if they feel that there's an imprint of a gun, they can then put their hands in your pocket and they can pull it out to see if it's a gun. Now, in order to do that, they need probable cause. Like I said, they use their senses. They don't need a warrant. Okay. So I just want to make sure we're clear on the way that warrantless searches work under the Fourth Amendment. All right. Now, how does this tie into the conversation of surveillance technologies and other technologies? You have to understand that the ultimate goal of the Fourth Amendment is to protect people's right to privacy and freedom from unreasonable intrusions by the government. However, the Fourth Amendment does not guarantee protection from all searches and seizures, but only those that are done by the government and deemed unreasonable under the law. So what that means is that when we're talking about the use of these technologies, the Fourth Amendment does not have adequate language to be able to apply to different situations that involve the use of these technologies and as it relates to legal doctrine for warrantless searches. This is why we need local, state, and federal legislation to govern the purchase and the use of these technologies and services, because the Fourth Amendment by itself does not cut it. And right now, with the way the direction of the federal government, we may not get that law and regulation from the federal government, which means that at this point, we have to rely on state and local, and especially local, because that's where the rubber meets the road when it comes to using surveillance tech. It always happens, especially on the local levels. So with that said, I do want to also mention that because of these technologies, remember I talked about totality of circumstances to be able to prove reasonable suspicion, to be able to prove probable cause. You could look at what other factors in the environment also justify them not having to need a warrant or stopping you and infringing upon your rights under the Fourth Amendment. Now, something else to note is that they can also use the data from these technologies to also satisfy the totality of circumstances. So now they can say, well, the reason why I pulled you over, the reason why we're patrolling this neighborhood, the reason why we use force on you, maybe even lethal force, right, is because the data, right, the gunshot detection technology said shot 911, shots were fired, right? The license plate reader, gave us information that made it seem like you were the one that we needed to go after, right? I mean, there's all kinds of justification now relying solely on technology, not on human beings, where now you're going to have law enforcement and also other city government agencies justified in issuing all kinds of potentially punitive actions based on this. And this technology is still experimental, okay? So that's where there's potential problems with the misuse and abuse of authority and the need for democratic processes like local laws and state laws to prevent that kind of misuse and abuse by authority. So just want to make sure you understand that. And one example so that you understand what the unexpected consequences and how that relates to police decision making is when we talk about like gunshot detection technology, like ShotSpot. Okay, it was used in Chicago, Illinois, I believe back in 2013. There was more recent years. There was a young Latino male, 13 years old, who was shot and killed by Chicago police because ShotSpotter had told them shots fired. And they showed up in their mind, they're thinking 911 shots fired. I got to be ready to use lethal force. That's the way law enforcement are trained. So when they show up and then somebody's there and they're unarmed, boom, they shoot them, right? Because they received information that was not comprehensive. It's not the same thing as getting a phone call from a human being saying 911, I think I see a couple of kids shooting guns maybe for fun, but I think you should come and check it out. Rather than, oh, I think there's a couple of people trying to kill each other outside. I think you need to be here ASAP. The technology does not provide any nuance or distinction. All it says is shots fired, 911. So law enforcement only respond to that and think the most negative thing so that they're prepared for it and can still come home alive. So because of that influence on the police decision-making, it results in potential unexpected consequences where people might end up dead, like what happened to Adam Toledo in Chicago. People might end up severely injured. We've had a lot of incidents of gunshot detection technology and other kind of technologies that, at least with gunshot detection technology, a firecracker, helicopter, or jackhammer triggers the sensor. And then that now alarms police to the location. And you could have people just partying, right? And they're using firecrackers for the party. And now law enforcement is showing up as if there's, somebody shooting, like an active shooter on the scene. Okay. So and then they result by doing what police do, what they're trained to do, and potentially using excessive force. So if we want to try to prevent these kinds of incidences from happening, we need to have the kinds of safeguards in place to prevent it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So with that said, next slide. So what are the solutions, right? That's what we're going to talk about. So next slide. So like I said earlier, I work with communities across the country on solving public safety challenges. And I do this through an approach that I developed with my over 15 years of experience doing this work in over 30 states and in Washington, D.C., called the Community Empowerment Centered Approach, and its vehicle called the CAP method. Now, as you can see here on this slide, the CAP method consists of 3 components. Each component must be achieved in order for the CAP method to be successful. So the first component is community empowerment, and this entails community members, especially community members who are living in neighborhoods with both high levels of crime, right, like reckless driving, community violence, youth-related issues, etc., and also a history of high levels of negative police interactions, like racial profiling, excessive use of force, sexual misconduct, etc. Those community members living in those particular neighborhoods and communities need to be involved in, need to have knowledge of, and need to have decision-making authority over all direct police-civilian interactions, like stops, arrests, use of force, surveillance technology, the way protests are handled, etc. And the reason for this is because the people closest to the problems are also the people closest to the solutions. So if we want to see long-term solutions for long-term problems, then we have to make sure the people that are closest to the problems, the people that have their fingers on the pulse, they live in these communities. They don't just get to come and go. Their kids go to school there. Their parents go to church there. right? Their supermarket is there, right? So they know what's going on. They know that if any solutions or reforms that have been implemented are actually working or not. So we have to make sure that they are at the helm of decision making with law enforcement, working with other public safety stakeholders in the community, like private business, like local media, like state and local government officials, etc., all working together as one community. All right. Now, the next component is accountability. And this involves creating an environment, an inhospitable environment for those who engage in misconduct by establishing both internal and external accountability mechanisms that would work together. And then the last component is transparency, which I define as the interconnectedness and coordination amongst what I call the four aspects of every community across the country, as you're going to see on the next slide. So, number one, we have law enforcement, and this includes state and local police, sheriff's office, etc. Then we have elected and appointed government officials. This also includes government employees. And then we have community members. This includes, like I mentioned earlier, directly impacted individuals, community-based organizations, direct service providers, faith-based organizations, private business, etc. And then last, we have the local press and news media. So according to my definition of transparency, all four of these aspects of the community would need to work together as one community to support public safety and ensure police accountability through more so proactive rather than reactive strategies. So next slide. So how does this tie into what we're talking about today, right? Which is automated enforcement, the ecosystem. How do we get local laws on the books to govern the purchase and the use of this so that there's not misuse and abuse by authority? Well, this ties into it because back in 2020, I was hired by NAACP Greater Grand Rapids, Michigan branch to come in and help them with making changes to a law. That's what you're looking at on this slide, is their administrative policy, which is the equivalent of a local ordinance. So that's their law that they've had on the books since 2015 that governs the purchase and the use of all surveillance technology and services by all city government entities. And so they wanted me to help them to make some changes to it because so ACLU Michigan worked with the city on the original law, but it ended up being very weak, weaker than what ACLU had hoped for. And so years later, NAACP brought me in. We ended up using information from other cities that have been doing this, and also information from the Born Suspect report. I think that was mentioned earlier that I co-authored in 2014 when I was directing NAACP National's Criminal Justice Reform Program. And so using the information in that report on ending racial profiling, in addition to evidence-based best practices, seeing what other cities have done around the country, we then custom tailored the language to fit this law for the city of Grand Rapids, provided a red line document to local city government. It took about 2 years of negotiation where myself, NAACP, met with the city manager, met with the mayor, met with the city attorney, met with the Civilian Oversight Authority, other city government entities, and finally getting the language down to where it worked for everybody. And then it was ratified in 2022 and now has been law and implemented without any litigation for at least going on now 3 years. Okay. Now, I want to just highlight with you the reason why NAACP brought me in to do it was because their police department, Grand Rapids Police Department, was looking at purchasing unmanned aerial drones and gunshot detection technology. So that way the unmanned aerial drones would be the eyes and the gunshot detection technology would be the ears to now engage with community members and do ongoing surveillance of the underserved Black and brown community in Grand Rapids. Now, they were worried about it because law enforcement were already using helicopters to do that kind of surveillance. So they knew with this technology, it was only going to be exponentially worse with bad practices. So we got, like I said, we negotiated over 2 years and we got the law passed. Now, next slide. Before I even go into the nitty gritty on the legislation, I first want you to hear from the press conference from in 2022 when the law was ratified after the changes we made to it. So you don't only hear from me, but I really want you to hear from NAACP. I want you to hear from the mayor of Grand Rapids, and I really want you to hear from the city manager of Grand Rapids about what they think, not only about the outcome, but the process.
I think if we look at surveillance technology and devices that are used across the country, I mean, let's be honest, we know that typically Black and brown people and poor and white folks are disproportionately impacted. And I think a lot of the narrative or the the argument to justify that would be the crime stats, right? In certain wards, neighborhoods, communities. And so, again, as I said earlier, it is critically important that we be preventive instead of reactionary. And I think that's what this policy does, by allowing that community voice to be at the front and to be centered and to hold folks accountable, quite honestly. I think this policy not only is a protection for civilians, but also for law enforcement agents as well.
Most cities, most municipalities in America in the US do not have a policy like this or an ordinance that governs surveillance technology and use of it. Good example, you look at Detroit, Michigan, they're currently advocates for trying to get something like this done. They don't have anything on the books. Chicago, same thing. And then cities that do have this kind of policy typically rarely ever mention explicitly race and any data related to race. For instance, like I mentioned, the complaints about the surveillance use being broken down by race. You look at New York City, they don't have that within their policy that was enacted this year, their ordinance related to surveillance use. And so this is definitely a bellwether policy for other municipalities that I believe you will see other cities using going forward as a model.
The process that we went through is an example of the power of working in partnership with community, the community coming together with city staff and policymakers for the benefit of everyone in the city. We all love this community, and we have more that bring us together than tear us apart.
We had to ask, were we doing everything we could to be transparent? Because the goal of our police department is ultimately to build trust with our community. In order to do that, you have to have a high level of transparency and accountability.
Okay, so we're gonna go to the next slide. So I wanted you to, before we go into the nitty gritty of the actual legislation, I wanted you to first hear from the stakeholders, right? Hear from them rather than hear from me. It's all of us working together. Everyone wins, right? When we're all working together. So with that said, let's now talk about the nitty gritty legislation. What was included in it and why it's important. So number one, you need to have a definition of surveillance. That is extremely important. One thing I really like about the law that we ratified in 2022 related to this topic is that the language in the law does not only provide for what is considered surveillance technology, it also explicitly provides language on what is not considered surveillance technology. Okay, so that's what you see here on this slide. I'm not going to go into all of it, but I just want to explain to you that that's the importance of having a surveillance definition. There's a lot of different definitions. I've heard law enforcement tell me surveillance to them means that there has to be a human body behind the camera observing in order for there to be surveillance. But when I talk to everyday community members, they believe that if the camera can be rewinded so that you can look for whatever you're trying to find, then that's surveillance. It doesn't matter if there's a human body behind it or AI or nobody. That is surveillance. Okay, so obviously there needs to be some level setting here on what exactly is surveillance. And that's why it's important that for your community, because every community is different, for your community, that you establish what that is with your law enforcement community, private business, state and local government officials, the media, everybody working together on that. Now, one other thing I want to highlight here is the last bullet. You'll see where it says surveillance equipment acquired prior to March 24th, 2015, or any subsequent replacement of that surveillance equipment that does not materially change the functions or capabilities of the equipment shall not be considered surveillance technology. Now, why is that important? I just want to highlight that because the original law, remember I said ACLU worked on the original law, that was passed back in March 24th, 2015. So anything that was purchased and used prior to that date is essentially grandfathered in to this new law. So it does not have to adhere to the provisions of this law. Now, they did that because that was when that original law went into effect and they already had agreements and contracts. They didn't want it to be retroactive. So that's how they did that. So I just want to highlight that with you. Next slide, please. Now you're going to see here, this is a similar definition, but rather than focusing on surveillance equipment, we're focused on surveillance services because it's not only surveillance equipment that city government agencies and state agencies are utilizing, there are also services provided by vendors where the vendor will, like with gunshot detection technology like ShotSpotter, when that sensor goes off, it's not the police department that is, looking over the data and making sure and verifying that it actually is a gunshot. It's the ShotSpotter company. They have people that work for them. They have access to the data. They actually own it under contract. And so they receive it. They are the ones that review it, and they are the ones that verify that it actually is what it's supposed to be. And that's a service that they provide. That's not just equipment. The equipment are the sensors that are placed on the buildings and the light poles. The service is when that alert goes off, their staff are the ones that look at the information, determine is it a gunshot or not, and then verify it is and send that to the police department as a 911 shots fired alert, so that now law enforcement can show up to the location where the gunfire was detected. So, that's a service. So understand there's surveillance services that are not the same as surveillance equipment. You could have both of them, or you could have either one of them, but you want to have a definition for both that are separate definitions so that it's explicitly known. These are two separate things, no confusion, and that means no litigation down the line. Remember that too. I'm a lawyer, so I'm telling you, think about liability. And one other thing I want to highlight here is, once again, that language that's emboldened at the bottom there relating to the March 24th, 2015 date. Once again, that's when the first initial law had passed. And so anything that was prior to that, purchased and used, surveillance technology service-wise, equipment service-wise, has now been grandfathered in. And that still applies even with the changes that we have now made to the law in 2022. Okay, next slide. Okay, so to start off here, one of the most important things we did in this legislation, when we talk about democracy, because listen, I'm very proud to be an American. I'm very proud to be in this country because, we have democracy. We have laws on the books. Yeah, we have our challenges with it, but we have it, and we have a rule of law. I'm happy I'm not in a country like China or a country like Russia where they don't have that, okay? So we have to make sure we keep that, especially when it comes to using something so new like surveillance technology, facial recognition technology, AI. We have to make sure that as we're using these new technologies and services, that we are also continuing to advance democracy, that we are continuing to stand by democratic processes. That's what makes us a democracy. And that's what, for me, makes me proud to be an American. Okay. So one of the things we did here that aligns with that and aligns with democracy is the creation of a community advisory committee on surveillance. Okay. Now, I'm not going to read everything that's on the screen, but I'll tell you what they're tasked with. This is essentially a civilian oversight authority that is created under the amendments that we made to the law in 2022 that is going to be tasked with, and these are civilians and elected officials who are going to be working together to make the determinations and decisions on working with government agencies, including the police department, on deciding if such technologies and services should be purchased and when and how they should be used. They're also tasked with being the liaison between community members and the city commission and other city government agencies, including the police department. And they're tasked with contributing to the oversight and audit of all of the technology and services that fall under this law. Okay, so this is a specific group that works on the decision-making process when there's a request to purchase a technology or service. They are involved in that decision-making process. So that's important to know. And then next slide. Okay, now when it comes to requests for surveillance equipment or services, I think something important for you to notice here is the first bullet, standard of approval. So the city commission shall only approve a request to fund, acquire, or use a surveillance technology if it determines the benefits of the surveillance technology outweigh its costs, that the proposed will safeguard civil liberties and civil rights, and that the uses and the deployments of the surveillance technology will not be based upon discriminatory or viewpoint-based factors or have a disparate impact on any community or group. It also provides for public comment. So let me break this down for you. So essentially, anytime a law enforcement agency, any other city government entity, even Parks and Rec, sanitation, if they put in a request to purchase surveillance technology, facial recognition tech, AI, or well, in this case, AI and not facial recognition, but let's say gunshot detection technology, license plate reader, speed light camera, etc. If they're putting in the purchase technology like that, or an unmanned drone, that's really big right now, then they have to first check the box on the standard of approval. After doing that, then they also have to provide all the information related to that technology and or service to be published on the city's website, so it's made public. So for instance, what's the manufacturer's description of the technology? Does it have AI in it? Does it have facial recognition technology in it? Is it compatible with AI? Is it compatible with facial recognition technology? Is there a potential disparate impact for the use of the technology? And then what is the mitigation plan to address the potential disparate impact? All of that needs to be included on the front end, in addition to operational protocols, data management protocols, data mining, when you're going through data, looking for things, right? All of those protocols have to be made public up front before any decision making is made. And it also has to allow for a public comment period so that members of the public can see the information, provide public comment, and then a decision will be made. Once again, adhering to the democratic process. We are taxpayers. We have a right to know what's going on with our money and to be able to say we don't like it, we want to discontinue it, okay? And that's what all this is about, making sure to have that level of transparency and decision-making through the democratic process. Next slide. Okay, now, like I said, transparency, something else that's important to note here is that the city shall maintain on a website accessible to the public a full listing of all approvals. So now this is when, they put in for the request, the information was put out there, we have public comment, the Community Advisory Committee on Surveillance met with the city commission, and they all said, okay, we're going to approve the city entity purchasing this technology. So now it's approved. What happens at this point is it now goes on a list that is on the city's website that anybody in the world can see, okay? And so, as it says here in the first bullet, the city shall maintain on a website accessible to the public a full listing of all approvals issued by the city commission for acquisition or use of surveillance equipment or surveillance services, along with the operational and data management protocols that have been approved for such surveillance equipment or services. All right. Now, something else I want to also hone in on here is that body-worn cameras and in-car camera footage they also fall under this law. Now, I think that's important because I don't know how many of you know this, but Axon is a vendor. They've made the tasers. They're well known for the tasers that they provide to law enforcement and the body-worn cameras, right? They have now come out with a new product, which is a body-worn camera that has AI in it, so that now, instead of a law enforcement officer, after they engage with somebody, writing up a police report, the AI will draft up the police report for the officer based on whatever it sees in the camera and data that it's picking up from the camera, okay? Now, there's a lot of issues with this, and we're not going to talk about that today, or at least not right now. Maybe in the Q&A we could, but I just want to highlight with you the direction that public safety is going, not only for law enforcement, but also for Parks and Recs, for sanitation, for Department of Transportation. These technologies are not just going to be for law enforcement. It's going to be for all city and state government entities. So the good thing about the law that we got ratified and passed in 2022, as you can see here in the second bullet, additionally, given the high frequency regarding the use of Grand Rapids Police Department body-worn cameras and in-car video, the Grand Rapids Police Department needs only to report alleged or actual failure to use body-worn cameras or in-car video. Reporting regarding body-worn cameras and in-car video should be provided on a quarterly basis. What does that mean? That means that if there's any alleged or actual failure for the officer to put on the camera and to use it, okay, then at that point, it falls under the provisions of this law. But if officers are using the cameras the way they're supposed to, then there's no need for the surveillance equipment, or at least for the body-worn camera footage or the in-car camera footage, to fall under the provisions of this law. Now, looking at the direction, like I said earlier, that Axon's going in, where now there's going to be AI in these cameras, this language probably is going to change so that it's just going to be inclusive of all footage, because we want to make sure that the AI is also being audited on a regular basis. We know AI can be highly biased because of the way it's coded with implicit biases, and also it's feeding off of information on the internet, a lot of which is biased, okay? So we got to make sure we have the proper democratic processes to have the proper checkpoints, so that we know that democracy is what we're using to use these kinds of technologies. Okay, now next slide. All right, so now we have complaints, audits, and surveillance use reports. Now, you remember I mentioned that under the new law that was ratified in 2022, that there's now this new surveillance oversight authority called the Community Advisory Committee on Surveillance. Now, prior to the creation of that civilian oversight authority, there was already another civilian oversight authority that is currently still in existence, and it's called the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability. Now, this other civilian oversight authority, the acronym, let's say, is OPA, right? Office of Oversight and Public Accountability, OPA. Now, OPA is tasked with doing audits once every 3 months and once every year of the use of all surveillance technologies and services by all city government entities, including the police department's body-worn cameras and in-car video, when that video footage or when that equipment was either allegedly had failed or there was an actual failure of that equipment. When that happens, it falls under the provisions of this law. Now, what that means is that civilian oversight authority is going to be doing those audits. When they do the audits, even if they receive a complaint from a community member about the use of that technology, they are the ones responsible for auditing that complaint. When they receive that complaint and they do the audit, they then provide their report, which is an internal report, only to the city manager, the city commission, and to that other civilian oversight authority that's created under the law, right? The Community Advisory Committee on Surveillance. Now, if the Community Advisory Committee on Surveillance says that, well, based on this complaint, it looks like this is a high-level violation of somebody's civil rights and civil liberties, they can decide to discontinue the use of that technology. All right, so this is a big deal because now we have dynamics at play of two different civilian oversight or even community advisory committees that are working together through a democratic process that can result in the discontinuance of the use of surveillance technologies. That is a big deal. And when we talk about democracy, this is what it's supposed to look like, okay? Taxpayers having control over how the money is being used in your community. Now, one other thing to note here is that there's also, and on next slide, we're going to talk about that actually. There's also an annual surveillance report that is, once again, like I said, produced by the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability, OPA. And this is a report that they produce and publish once a year. And what it does is that it contains details on the impact of the use of surveillance technologies and services for that year. So for instance, they'll include information on any complaints that were filed against the use of technology that year. It'll include information on any violations of civil rights or civil liberties that year. It'll include information on and all that information on violations of civil rights, civil liberties, and complaints is broken down by race, gender, age, location. It'll also include information on how much money did it cost to use the technology that year, and then what were the sources of funding? Because like I said earlier, not all sources of funding are from the state, federal, and local governments. A lot of sources of funding are from private sources when it comes to law enforcement, police foundations, okay? So we want to make sure as taxpayers in a democracy that we know what's going on with the money. We know those who are there to serve us. How are you doing this? What are you doing? And are we in agreement with it? And if we're not, how do we have a voice in that? How do we have decision-making authority in that? That's what democracy is about. Next slide, please. And one other thing to highlight about the annual surveillance report is that the first report was published in April of last year. And so I believe there's going to be a banner on the bottom that will include, yes, going right now, that will include the link for that report. And so if you want to check out that report while I'm speaking, you can just go to that link and the report will be right there for you to look at off of my website, which will then take you to the city's website where the report is. Okay, so now let's talk about prohibited uses. Now, this is a big topic. This is why a lot of people want to have a law like this on the books in the first place, is to prohibit the use of these technologies in certain circumstances and for certain uses, okay? So let's go through what that is. So number one, we have surveillance equipment and services shall not be used to harass, intimidate, or discriminate against any individual or group, right? So that's explicitly stated in the law. Number two, surveillance equipment and services shall not be utilized to conduct personal business of any type. Now that's a big deal. I don't know if you guys saw in the news about 3 or 4 months ago in Wichita, Kansas, there was a police officer who used surveillance technology, license plate readers, etc., to stalk and track their former romantic partner. Okay, so this is once again raising that alarm. We need to have democratic processes on the books to prevent the misuse and abuse of these technologies and services by authority figures. Okay, this is a reality. Okay, number 3, the last bullet there, except as approved by the city manager or their designee in the extenuating circumstances, surveillance equipment shall not be weaponized. Okay, so 2 things there I want you to hone in on. One is extenuating circumstances. This is language that we agreed upon in our negotiation with the city government, that there needed to be a carve out, right? Because you don't ever know what might happen. You're looking at Los Angeles right now with the fires, like some of the worst fires they've ever had in their history. Back when COVID was happening, right? That was a pandemic, a natural disaster that we didn't see that coming, okay? So there are certain circumstances that you just cannot foresee, that you might need to purchase some of these technologies and use them under those circumstances fairly quickly. So you're not gonna, going through the democratic processes is gonna slow that down, and then could result in people getting injured, property getting damaged, et cetera, et cetera. So for those particular circumstances, that's when they allow for those technologies to not have to adhere to the provisions under this law. So the way it's defined in the law that passed in 2022 is that extenuating circumstances are defined as incidents involving a good faith belief that an imminent danger to individual safety or public health is likely. Okay, that's number 1. So that was important to have that, to allow flexibility for city government entities to be able to use the technology when they really need to use it, and they just don't have time to go through those democratic processes. The second thing I want to hone in on is surveillance equipment shall not be weaponized. That is explicit language in the law that was passed in 2022. Now, how is weaponized defined under the law? It's defined as to operate and or utilize surveillance equipment or surveillance services equipped with weapons like firearms, bombs, or other weapons, outfit surveillance equipment or surveillance services with weapons, or discharge weapons attached to surveillance equipment or surveillance services. Okay, so when we look at the conflicts going on in the Middle East, the conflicts going on with Russia and Ukraine, what you're seeing a lot of is that they're using technology like unmanned aerial drones, the same unmanned aerial drones that have been complained about all up and down the East Coast, right? They're thinking it's UFOs, all right? Now, the worry is this. We don't want what's going on in those international conflicts to happen on domestic soil, okay? We don't want government agencies using weaponized technology on civilians, okay? So we have to make sure that is explicitly in the law. And that's why we got that done in the law that passed in 2022. So next slide. So since then, like I told you, we had our red line document. It was ratified and passed into law in 2022. That now is being implemented. If you have not already taken a look at, please check out the report that was published last year. The next report will get published this year. So you can see how we've been implementing it without any litigation. All right, I want to highlight that because I know Detroit, Michigan, and New York City and other cities, they've passed similar laws, but they didn't utilize the community empowerment-centered approach for their process, and the process reflects the outcome. Okay, the outcome of their process has been litigation. Okay, there's litigation for implementation of Detroit's law and New York City's law. It's been 3 years going on now that our law has been implemented in Grand Rapids, Michigan. No litigation. Okay, like I said, the process reflects the outcome. We utilize the community empowerment-centered approach process, and that was also incorporated into the outcome. So with that said, what we're doing now, utilizing the community empowerment-centered approach, we know facial recognition technology, other biometric remote recognition technologies, predictive policing technology, which is using artificial intelligence. We know this stuff is still experimental. We know there's not enough research and data out there to show this is the best way to do it. This is how you can use it. So until that has happened, we think it should be prohibited from being used completely. All right. I know that the federal government under Trump in 2019, they had done a study on the use of facial recognition technology. NIST had done that study that showed that there was a high likelihood of misidentification of certain groups of people, specifically young people, old people, elderly people, women, and people of color. And they said especially Black women. There was a high level of misidentification. And we've seen that play out. Recently, Detroit Police Department, they've had a number of police wrongful arrest cases where there have been Black women in particular who've been arrested. And then turns out it wasn't you, it's another Black woman. You were misidentified. And now they're being sued for wrongful arrest. Okay. So this is a real thing and it's happening. And like I said, we need to prohibit the use of these technologies until there's more research and more safeguards put in place. But if that's not going to happen, then we have to do it locally. We have to get the laws on the books to prohibit it. Okay. One other thing I want to highlight with you is artificial intelligence. I know that's a big thing now. President Trump, he had a big press conference on it yesterday. They're going to do a huge investment on AI. Okay. So we have to talk about it. This is a reality. It's not just talk anymore. So the reason why AI is so dangerous is because at the end of the day, like I said earlier, the people that are coding it have implicit biases that are not being audited. On top of that, we also know that it's pulling data off the internet. A lot of data on the internet is biased. We know that. So we cannot trust artificial intelligence results until we get the proper safeguards put in place. So I just want to highlight that for you. If I have a little bit of time, what I'm gonna do real quick is just give you the definition of facial recognition technology as it's stated under the law. Now, what we did is we looked at other cities that have prohibitions on this. We then looked at, we used my expertise with the work I've done around the country. We came up with a new red line document with this language. And on the next slide, as you could see here, you could see an example of this language as it's highlighted. Like I said, it's just a straight up prohibition of the use of all these technologies and any information that's obtained from these technologies to be prohibited from being used. I do want to highlight with you, facial recognition technology is defined as an automated or semi-automated process that assists in identifying or verifying an individual based on an individual's face, or identifies or logs characteristics of an individual's face, head, or body to infer emotions, associations, expressions, or the location of an individual. Just in case people are not clear as to what I'm saying when I say facial recognition technology, that's what I mean. And also when I say other remote biometric recognition technologies, I mean an automated or semi-automated process that assists in identifying an individual, capturing information about an individual, or otherwise generating or assisting in generating information about an individual based on physiological, biological, or behavioral characteristics ascertained from a distance, uses voice recognition technology, or identifies or logs such characteristics to infer emotion, associations, activities, or the location of an individual, and does not include identification based on fingerprints or palm prints, and that have been manually obtained during the course of a criminal investigation or detention. And then the last definition is predictive policing technology, which means computer algorithms that use pre-existing data to forecast or predict places or times that have a high risk of crime or individuals or groups who are likely to be connected to a crime. This definition does not include computer algorithms used solely to visualize, chart, or map past criminal activity like heat maps. So in other words, if you're just looking at a map saying this is where the majority of violent offenders live, this is where the majority of violent crimes happen, that's not predictive policing. Predictive policing is taking that data and saying, well, we know this person is a habitual offender and has a record. Let's track them and see who they're hanging out with, where they're hanging out at. And then let's predict if they're going to commit another crime and what that's going to be based on that, and also their criminal record, right? Same thing with location. We know this location has a lot of stuff happening here. We're going to now predict based on the information we have, crime stats, etc., that another crime will happen here on this date and time, because that seems to be the pattern, right? That's what predicting policing means. And they're looking to rely on artificial intelligence to drive those predictions rather than human beings, okay? So just to wrap it up, next slide. Oh yeah, sorry. And then this slide here, one last one. This slide has to do with the prohibition as it relates to having contracts and agreements, city agencies having contracts and agreements with third-party entities like vendors, like I mentioned, Axon, Flock, Smart Thinking, Sound Thinking, ShotSpotter, etc. You know, we want to make sure that they also are prohibited from having contracts with these kinds of third parties for these kind of technologies. All right. Now, last but not least, to wrap it up before we go to Q&A, things to keep in mind. Number one, like I've been saying, there's a need to adopt regulatory frameworks that address concerns rather than assume Fourth Amendment frameworks will be adequate. In other words, we need to get state and local laws on the books. And there also needs to be departmental policies that reflect those laws. But the laws need to be there because policies can change like that. With a new police chief, a new director of an entity, you cannot change a law like that. There are democratic processes in place that have to be adhered to in order for that to happen. That's why a law is the most important thing that needs to happen. Number two, on the second bullet, address predictive policing as a part of an automated ecosystem of police technologies. And what that means is predictive policing, AI, that is now going to be the future of policing. I mean, law enforcement are having a hard time staffing up. They need to rely on technology that can do the job of multiple human body officers in order for them to continue to address calls to service, okay? So AI and predictive policing is here. It's not going anywhere. It's only going to expand. So we have to start thinking about how that ties in to that automated enforcement ecosystem that we talked about earlier, right? All those different services, automated enforcement technologies converging and working together to give whoever's behind that screen whatever data they want. And we have no idea what they're doing with it, who they're selling it to, how they're using it, what is in the data. That's problematic in a democracy where taxpayers are paying for this. I'm sorry, I don't like that. And I don't think any of us should. So we have to make sure that we're addressing AI and predictive policing as it relates to that ecosystem, because that is happening now. And then third bullet, recognize and address the technology human handoff. What that means is the hot potato effect. That's what I call it, right? Community members, we've seen this in Chicago with ShotSpotter and other communities. We want to see the data, right? We want to know what's going on with the data of the technology. Oh, the city's like, well, we don't have the data. Talk to the police department or talk to that government agency. You go to the government agency, the police department. Wait, we want to see the data. Where is it? Oh, we don't have the data. You got to talk to the private company, the vendor, you know, who we have a contract with, right? You go to the vendor. Well, we want the data. They're like, well, guess what? You can't get the data because we have it protected under private contract because it's considered trade secrets. And if we give you the data, we're worried that our competition might use it and then use it against us to then, you know, outdo us in the industry, et cetera. So there's a lot of game playing going on that's very anti-democratic. And the best way to get around it is what we did in Grand Rapids. Codify it into law. No, you have to make that information transparent and accessible to the members of the public, period. That's it. So last but not least, be wary of an experimental approach. Like I said earlier, all of this stuff is new, okay? We don't know what the long-term ramifications are going to be. And that's dangerous in a democracy, all right? So we have to remember, this is about democracy. We must always emphasize and remember to pay attention to the human element in public safety, like relationships and capacity building amongst public safety stakeholders, and not just problem solving, okay? Democracy is about people coming together to solve problems, not relying on technology to do it for us. So we're building and fostering a healthy and sustainable community, and I look forward to doing that with you. So thank you. And on the last slide here, before we go to Q&A, if you're interested in contacting me, getting more information, you can use your cell phone, scan the QR code, it'll take you directly to my website. You could also email me at the word empower, EMPOWER, at Mayors, MAYERS, the word solutions.org. So empower at mayorsolutions.org with 2 S's. You could also go to my website, www.mayorsolutions.com with 2 S's. And if you're on social media a lot, look me up. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Just look up Mayor Strategic Solutions LLC. It'll take you right to those social media pages. So thank you. And please do keep in touch, and I look forward to the Q&A.
All right. Well, that was a lot of information, Carlton. Thank you so much for sharing all of that information with us. We do have a comment and a question from someone from the audience. So those of you who are watching, please feel free to put any comments or questions that you might have for Carlton in the chat. We'll take some time to go over some questions here now. So we have viewer Joanne Scott Woods, who says, we, 300 residents in HUD housing for the elderly and disabled, live in the downtown precinct that has the highest crime rate and the highest number of officers. How do we as a community make it safer for us to walk to the next corner where the Circle K is? And I want to add another question to that as well, is how can the Black community push for greater transparency and regulation around that use? And can it be something that those residents of that HUD housing facility can benefit from with regard to the high traffic, the high crime in that area?
Yes, and so thank you for asking that question. I have another presentation or workshop that I've done specifically for public housing authorities, where I talk about how they can use the community empowerment centered approach to develop a process where they're working with the HUD, director, public housing authority director, the public housing authority board, and also security and the residents and even guests, because guests tend to come up when these issues come up, to have meetings and talk about creating a policy for their public housing authority that would govern the purchase and the use of these kinds of technologies. And so I would recommend that you do something similar to what we did in Grand Rapids, but have it be custom tailored, not as a law, but more so as a policy for your public housing authority. The same language is applicable. It's just that you'd have to custom tailor it to fit your specific public housing authority. Now, I think anybody can draft up a law. What I really hone in on is how is the law created, right? You don't just want to have somebody write it up and send it out and say, this is the law or this is the policy. You want to make sure everybody who's impacted is involved in that policy-making process, right? Like have like a resident-led policy-making mechanism. And that's where the community empowerment-centered approach comes in on how do we set up meetings in a way where we're making sure everybody's voice is heard, we're capturing that information and then using it to create something actionable, tangible, and workable going forward. So if that be an MOU, if it be a policy, if it be a strategic plan, if it be a law, right? There's a lot of things that can be actionable, tangible, and workable, but you got to get something so that way you're not just meeting to meet and talk, you're meeting to produce something that will result in solutions. And so that's something that I would recommend is, you can look at this video and maybe see if there's some information there that's helpful. I also offer a workshop, like I mentioned earlier, for public housing authorities to help them put together that kind of process so that they can create that kind of policy by getting everybody's voice included and then have it. Now, I think as a lawyer, that's a good thing because that's a good way to prevent liability down the line by including everybody's voice up front. That way, nobody can say, well, I wasn't included, and now this has had a negative impact on me. I'm suing you, right? So you get those voices in up front. Those kind of issues come to the surface up front. You then address it in the language, and then guess what? Fewer lawsuits, less liability, more success, right? That's what we want. We want more success. Was there another question or did I?
Oh, no, that was good. But I do want to have one follow-up question, not with regard to that, but another question. And then I'm going to bring Commissioner Diane Post up to ask some other questions as well. So one last question, and this one is from me. This is the Commission of African American Affairs. So I'm wondering if you can speak specifically to how this is impacting the Black community and how the Black community can advocate for these issues, or what is it that the Black community really needs to understand about this specifically for our community?
So as it relates to our community, what we need to understand is that if you think that stop and frisk is not good, if you think that it's had an adverse disproportionate impact on Black and brown people, but in particular Black people, then you should be very worried about now technology doing the same thing, but essentially doing it on steroids, right? So it's going to be, when we're talking about racial disparities that we already know exist, if you just look at the data on WashingtonPost.com right now on officer-involved interactions, officer-involved deaths and shootings. If you look at mappingpoliceviolence.com right now, look at that data on uses of force and engagement with negative interactions with law enforcement and community. I mean, the data's there, right? The racial disparities have only been going up since 2020 when it comes to officer-involved shootings and officers using force, okay? And that's number one. It's been going on with everybody, including people of the white community are seeing an increase in use of force and in officer-involved deaths, but especially Black people, because we only make up but maybe 30% of the overall population, right? I'm not sorry, not 30%. We make up 13%, maybe 13% of the overall U.S. population, and we make up about 25% of individuals who are killed annually by law enforcement nationwide. Okay, and most of those incidents where Black people are killed in that 25% out of the overall, okay, are Black people who are running away from police and are shot in the back. Okay, so I'm just saying, when we look at the racial disparities, like, okay, 13% overall, but about 25% of those that are being killed annually by law enforcement, right? That's a racial disparity, right? That's pretty much a double in the number of who we are those that are being harassed, killed, etc. So use of force, right? So I just think that alone, when we just think about, that's what it looks like with human body officers engaging with us. Now we're talking about artificial intelligence, which we know is biased. We're talking about facial recognition technology, which we know misidentifies especially Black women. And now we're going to say, okay, these same police that still have these issues that have not been addressed, right? Those practices are still going on. Now we're going to give you these toys that are going to allow you to do what you're doing on such an exponential level. All right. To me, Black people need to be concerned about that. I think even more than we were concerned about stop and frisk and zero tolerance policing, right? I mean, using technology takes that to the nth level. And when you don't have the laws on the books, which we're not going to have it federally, not under this administration, so we have to do it through state and local, and especially local. If you don't have it, the police are getting the technology, and under this new administration, they're going to be subsidizing law enforcement to use more of these technologies. And so all I'm saying is, Black people, and I think all people, not only Black people, because this is going to impact everybody, but especially Black people, because of those racial disparity numbers that I just talked about earlier, we really need to just be aware, be vigilant, and be working hard with our local lawmakers, our state lawmakers, our police chiefs and sheriffs, community groups, the media, and private business, okay? Private business has a lot of influence over state and local government officials, all right? We know that now, corporations. We're seeing the impact of money on elections, okay? So all I'm saying is we got to make sure everybody's on the same page about this and make sure that Black people are lobbying the right stakeholders in your community to push the dial so that it gets done. Whatever that looks like. Every community is different demographics, different cultures, different histories. Whatever it looks like for you, you got to kind of figure out how can we get the leverage we need to get this law on the books before this stuff is being used by everybody. And all we're seeing are Black people getting locked up because the debtors' prisons, they can't afford to come out, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's all these lawsuits that are resultant. And now the city got to pay out with taxpayer dollars, okay? At the end of the day, everybody hurts. And remember, I had that slide earlier, everybody wins, right? That's what we want. We want like Grand Rapids. We want everybody to win. We want the city manager, the mayor, the police, the community. We want everybody to say we did this together and we won, okay? So that to me is why this is so important for Black people and why they need to start now to lobby their government officials about that.
Wow, thank you so much for that. The one thing that you said that stuck with me is that they're getting these new toys, right? So if you're looking at these things as toys, then we're definitely misusing them and playing with them as toys. And they could be manipulated in a way that they're not supposed to be manipulated in. So thank you so much for your responses. I'm going to bring Commissioner Diane Post up right now to see if she has any questions to ask, maybe one or two questions to contribute to the discussion before we give our closing thoughts.
What I wanted to say was that this is a very timely and necessary discussion. And the reason why is Axion is here. It's in Scottsdale. And they've already talked about these new AI cameras that they're coming out with. There's already been discussion about purchasing these and getting the money to purchase these. So it is absolutely necessary here in the Phoenix area and around the state for that matter. We know of 45 years of difficulty that we've had with the Phoenix police. And what I want to say is we don't want to just wring our hands here tonight and say, oh my goodness, what are we going to do about this? We want to actually do something. So I want to tell all of you who are listening to please, if you are interested in working on this issue and moving toward what Mr. Mayor has been talking about, please let the commission know so that we can then put together a working group and then start working on this issue and move towards the steps that he has suggested. So I think that we don't want to leave here tonight just wringing our hands. We want to leave here with a movement forward on what we can do about this. So please let the commission know if you're interested in working on a working group.
Yeah, most definitely, especially for that community that is in the downtown area with those 300 residents. I have an idea of where you might be at, Miss Joanne, but I don't want to throw it out there without the confirmation of that. But definitely, we do need to be thinking about how we can address these safety measures. There is another question in the comments. I'm not sure if this is related to our discussion. I'll throw it out there and see if it might be something that is, but it says, Candace says, so is it legal for a search warrant? And if this is legal advice that you lawyers can't give, please say that as well. So is it legal for a search warrant to be conducted without the affidavit being filed? And I'm not sure if that has to do with the technology being the reason why this, law enforcement is now engaging in this situation. That's the question.
So I'm assuming that she's asking if it's legal for officers to do a search without a warrant. That's what it sounds like?
That's not what it says.
That does what it sounds like. So maybe it is to AI, picked up this thing and now they're maybe it's in regard to the stop and frisk conversation as well.
Right. So it is. And essentially the answer is yes. And that's what I had described earlier. I had described two different scenarios, one being a traffic stop, one being a pedestrian stop, where a warrantless search was justified under the law, right? So they can infringe upon your Fourth Amendment rights for search and seizure without a warrant under certain circumstances where they can prove reasonable suspicion, which we talked about what that would entail. And then would also include probable cause, which involves using potentially, any one of your five senses or all of them to be able to detect and identify that there's a crime occurring or that there's a crime that's about to occur. And so as long as they're able to do that and they can justify it, which now with these technologies, and they could use the data in addition to their senses to say, oh, well, also the gunshot detection technology told us that it does too, or the license plate reader and the unmanned aerial drone, or, they can now also use that to justify their reasonable suspicion, to justify their probable cause, to do a warrantless search. So yes, they can do it. And that's why there needs to be local laws on the books to govern this stuff. Because the Fourth Amendment is just not good enough to cover that kind of situation.
Okay. What about the gunshot detection technology? Would that warrant a search in someone's home if they thought it was coming from someone's home? Would they be able to do that without a warrant?
I think that's going to be testier. Usually, judge-made law, or a law that comes from the courts, they tend to lean more towards the privacy rights of citizens, especially when it comes to their home. And so, because that's the whole point of the U.S. Constitution, is to prevent the government from just coming into your home and saying, now we're here, we can do whatever we want. So that's something that I think, if they had other evidence, like some really strong evidence and a lot of it, in addition to, gunshot detection technology, in addition to potentially or license plate reader, other kinds of like visual, like unmanned drone technology. Yeah, they can definitely do that. We saw that used in New York City actually last year, when New York City, they just came out with their unmanned aerial drones, and they used it for the first time during the West Indian Day Parade weekend, where they had unmanned drones doing surveillance of people's backyards, right? At least the areas of the backyard that were not covered, right? So, we're already starting to see, even when it comes to using unmanned drones, there really is no legal doctrine or legal law on the books that governs how that should be used. We have law for helicopters, right? There's case law on, law enforcement or government agencies using helicopters to do surveillance over your property. And there's actual restrictions on how and when and all that they can do that. But when it comes to unmanned drones, like we've seen on the East Coast with New Jersey and all of that, it's up to the FAA, the federal government, to say, well, this is what you're allowed to do and how much you can have them fly over and blah, blah, blah. Beyond that, state and local, they're still trying to figure that stuff out. So that's why, like I said, what we did in Grand Rapids really needs to be replicated. It's a bellwether, it really is, for what is necessary and going to be necessary around the country. So as sooner we can get these local laws on the books, the sooner, no matter what technology comes out, it will be covered under that law through the democratic process.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Mayers, for your time tonight.
I have
And
one more
thank you.
thing. If I have 1
Yes.
minute,
Well, I was going to
just
give
real quick.
you. I was going to give you closing thoughts. Can it
Oh,
be rapid?
perfect. There we go. Then I'll
Okay.
wait. Thank you.
Okay. So I just want to say thank you for this content. I thank you for the questions from our audience. For those of you who need further legal advice, there are free legal aid programs out here. I'm sure Commissioner Post can let you know of the names of a couple of those free legal aid programs if you do need more intensive legal advice regarding any other of situations that you might be a part of or have experienced. So right now, I'm going to take me and Miss Diane, or excuse me, Commissioner Post out. I'm very unprofessional, y'all, and super loving. So everybody gets a pet name. So I'm going to take us out, and Mr. Mayers is going to give his final thoughts. Then I'll bring Commissioner Post up to give some final thoughts and plug a couple things, and then I'll come out and close us out. So there you are. The floor is yours, Carlton.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tiffany. And thank you so much, Commissioner Post, and also Jerry as well, and everybody else who was here to participate and watch this presentation today. I want to just highlight a couple of things. Now, even with everything we're talking about, and we're talking about all these technologies that are being used or that are going to be used, I know for some people it might sound cool, like they might think about like Back to the Future and the second one, of course, where they had flying cars and it was all futuristic. You know, some other people might be scared and might be thinking more about 1984, right? Like Big Brother's watching you, all these different ways that they can now observe and do surveillance. The number one thing that I want to hone in on is actually something that happened currently that's made a lot of news around the country. And it has to do with the tragic shooting of the CEO, the United Healthcare CEO. Now, I'm not going to focus on the shooting. What I do want to focus on is the fact that this happened. I'm born and raised in New York City. I'm just going to put that out there, number one. So I grew up in New York. I can tell you right now, this camera is everywhere in New York City. And at 6 a.m, when that incident occurred, there's a lot of hustle and bustle. There's a lot of people out doing things. So it's not quiet at 6 a.m. in New York City. He was out there and literally gunned down somebody on the street in public. And then it took NYPD almost a week to catch him, even though they have cameras and all the surveillance tech and unmanned drones everywhere. And do you know how they caught him? They didn't catch him because a license plate reader or an unmanned drone or whatever other piece of technology identified him and said, he's at this location right now, go and get him. No, they caught him because a human being just like you and me, saw his picture and recognized him in McDonald's, called the police, and said, hey, I think this is the guy you're looking for. And lo and behold, they caught him. Who'd have thunk? Old school way of doing things is what ended up catching him rather than all this technology. Unmanned drones, license plate readers, all these cameras, all gunshot detection was not what did it. It helped, right? Because at least there was a photo, but that's not what caught him. What caught him was the human element. So I just want to really stress that with you, that even with all these technologies, at the end of the day, the best way, and really, in my opinion, the only way to adequately and effectively solve public safety challenges is through the human element. And that's why the community empowerment centered approach through the CAP method, in my opinion, is not the way, but is one of the best ways to solve public safety challenges, because it's not only the outcome, it's also the process. The process reflects the outcome. So if you're interested in working with me on getting your own local law, your local policy that would govern the purchase and use of surveillance technology in your community, I have a workshop that I'm already doing. I just did one in Kalamazoo, Michigan a couple of months ago. I'll be doing more of them around the country where we could do it virtually, hybrid, or in person. And I can go through with you literally step by step how you can create your own local law that includes information on racial disparities, similar to what we did in Grand Rapids, but custom tailored for your community, your demographics, your history, your culture. So if you're interested in that, please do reach out. My information is in the banner, my website, and also my email address. And I look forward to working with you. So please do keep in touch, especially with all this stuff going on with technology and the new administration. We really need to stay close with each other and stay local. Even though we're going to think global, act local. So thank you very much and have a good night.
Yes, I want to say if you are interested, remember, if you want to work on this, let the commission know so that we can then put together a working group to get this moving. Secondly, we have put together an extensive list of legal resources, both criminal and civil, landlord, tenant, all of that. I cannot guarantee you it's on the website yet, but it should be on the website soon if it's not, so that would be a place for you to go to find out where the legal resources are. Last, we are going to skip February. We are not going to have one of our pillar talks in February because it is the month of the African American Legislative Conference, which is 4 days from almost 5 days now, from Tuesday through Saturday, the 11th through the 15th. So if you're not registered, please, it's on the website there, or it's on the screen. So please sign up for it. It's going to be a fantastic event. So because of that, we're not meeting in February. We will resume on the third Thursday in March, and we will be talking about the Innocence Project and some of the people who have been wrongfully convicted and who, through legal means, were then eventually released because they were found not to have been guilty. So that's our topic in March. So thank you very much for being here tonight, and over to you, Tiffany.
Thank you, Commissioner Post, so much for your comments and your thoughts. All right, that wraps up our Pillar Talk, our very first Pillar Talk here on all of our social media platforms. Thank you for everyone who spent your hour and a half with us tonight. We are so grateful for you. Please, like Commissioner Post said, join us again in March on the third Thursday of the month. Also, just to plug our conference again, we are having our Arizona African American Legislative Days Conference, and it is coming up very quickly. So please register for that. We have some very in-depth programming for you. This year is going to be a really great year. So please join us. It starts February 11th and runs all the way through February 15th. We're adding a Saturday this year, and it is going to be amazing. So please register for that event. If you have youth who want to join us for Youth Day on the Friday, that is going to be amazing, amazingly filled time at the Capitol for our kiddos. So thank you again for spending your Thursday evening here with us. We have appreciated you so much. We will see you all at the conference at the Arizona State Capitol, February 11th through the 15th. Thank you so much, everyone. Good night.